Why is it that the people who pray the most have the most of their children in the jails of this country?
Teach on it, brother. Teach it.
Yeah.
Teach it.
That's, we need to ask those kind of questions.
Teach that truth, brother.
How is it that the people who don't see color to treat all people alike, who don't get into racism, that most of their children are in jail? And the other ones who see color, the other ones who deal exclusively with their ethnicity, their children are outside and their children are being fed and so forth. Is the reward then for not seeing color, for being non-racist, for not talking hate language, going to jail? Well, you better start talking hate language then. You know? Answer me this. Why is it? Okay, we'll have to. Why is it? You see, we talk about this business in this kind of situation. If God is no respecter of people, if God loves us all the same, not one group any better than the other, you get whole people being wiped out from the face of the earth. Did God love the Indians less? But no, you say he loves everybody the same. It's a dangerous kind of love, baby. Then it must say that God loving us all the same is not necessarily our basic protection. Because despite our being loved all the same and not one being held above the other, we see all kinds of inequalities in the world. And we've seen certain groups destroyed and wiped away from the face of the earth. And you know what I find amazing about that too? Is that the people who've done the greatest part of the wiping away are the people who worship the same God we do. Yeah. They pray to Jesus like we do, don't they? And yet somehow we got enslaved, and yet somehow we are brutalized and killed out here. We got to deal with some real issues here somewhere. There's something not quite right here. You know what else I find interesting? That those who were supposed to be the chosen people of God really got the ovens. So apparently it takes a little more than just praying. It takes a little more than just feeling like you got a special relationship to survive on this earth. Being the favorite of God apparently is not quite enough to protect you. And I can see why to a degree, because God has already blessed you with the mind. He's already blessed you with the brain. But we got some people who think it's holy not to use it.
Teacher. Right.
Yeah.
Teacher.
Yeah. They think the pursuit of knowledge is a sin. The pursuit of learning is a sin. Even though this is a knowledge machine. This is a learning machine. This is a thinking machine. This is an analyzing machine. A remembering machine. And God must have put it in our heads for some reason. And for us not to use it is blasphemy. And maybe that's why those who don't use it end up ultimately going the way of perishing from the face of the earth. But we have this peculiar thing then of receiving the gift from God, as we say, and then refusing to use those gifts. And yet we expect it to be protected by God when we reject the gifts he gives us. And you know I've talked about the gifts that black children have. Gifts second to none. We're given the best gifts in the world. We were the first people God ever even created.
Teacher. All right.
Yes, sir.
We have minds that are second to none. Yet somehow we've been deceived into thinking that to use them is to be non-black. That means our consciousness has been created by someone else. Consciousness then is a power. It's a type of power. How much power consciousness has depends upon its level and its organizational state and its functional state. That's why other people who want to use other people seek to control their what? Their consciousness. Because one thing about consciousness, the state of consciousness you're in determines what you're capable of doing or not doing. If you're in one level of consciousness, you can do one thing. If you're in another level of consciousness, you can do another. One of the greatest problems we have to solve in trying to achieve our fullest development is knowing how to control our consciousness in such a way that we can bring to a task or a problem or something and the level of consciousness appropriate to it. You see, how to match level of consciousness, organization of consciousness with problem, with circumstance, you see, and how to be able to do that through our will. That's a very difficult task to achieve. In other words, then, when we know our body needs rest, it cannot get rest if we remain in a state of wakeful consciousness, can it? Not in the deepest sense. It cannot receive the restoration and rebuild itself as long as it's highly what? Aroused. So what do? We put ourselves, or let ourselves do what? Go into the consciousness of what? Sleep. You see? And once we go into that consciousness, the body begins its healing process and reparative process, you see, and recreating process. And we awaken, energize, and heal, and with the clarity of consciousness that permits us to function. And you can't get that kind of healing and clarity of consciousness and restfulness and reparation unless you go into the consciousness of what? Sleep. But while you're asleep, you can't do what? Certain other things. So there are things you can do when you're awake and alert and in that state of consciousness that you can't do when you're asleep. And there are things you can do when you're asleep that you can't do when you're in another state of consciousness. And there are many levels of consciousness, you see. And if we could recognize them and know what behaviors are related to them, we will be able to regulate our behavior in a very appropriate way by regulating the levels of consciousness related and correlated with those behaviors. And therefore, you see, consciousness enables us to achieve certain ends. It makes it possible for us to accomplish certain things. And when you are able to achieve certain ends and accomplish certain things, that means you're exercising power. Because power involves the ability to achieve certain ends against resistance. The ability to act in terms of one's own interests. Depending on the state of consciousness you're in, you will relate not only to yourself in a very sort of way, but you will relate to others in different sorts of ways. If you're in a state of consciousness that you call anger, your relationship to that same person when you were in love changes, doesn't it? Your language changes, your body changes, everything changes when that state of consciousness is in possession. When you're feeling lovely and all of this, the language changes, the body changes, and other things happen. You see? Therefore, people who want to control other people seek to control their consciousness. Consciousness is to a good degree a social product, meaning that it is created as a result of the nature of the type of social interactions we have with other people to a good extent. And when you look then at the consciousness of black people in America and of African people in the world, consciousness that we exhibit to a good degree at this point reflects the nature of the interaction we have with European people. And one of the major objectives of European people is to manipulate and control the consciousness of African people. And through their manipulation and control of the consciousness of African people, divert that power, which ordinarily would be the power of African consciousness, to their own use, and increase their prosperity and power thereby. The relationship then of the European man to the African man, to a good extent, is a relationship of Count Dracula to his victim. To suck the blood of African consciousness to maintain their own life. This is what it's about. Let's be a little more concrete. I see consciousness as being composed of at least three elements: contents, and what I call instrumentalities, and directional organizational factors. What do we mean here? Consciousness contains things: knowledge, perceived knowledge, beliefs, opinions, our conditioned emotions, our conditioned behavior, behavioral orientation, our perception of ourselves, our worldview. Consciousness also has in it our unconscious drives and motives. We are driven by things we're not even aware of. That's part of our consciousness and the moods we are in. Consciousness also contains what I call the methods of information processing. See, it's not enough just to have knowledge and facts and beliefs and have them exist in your mind. That's sort of a static type of thing. You also now must find some way of using the contents of your mind. And you put them to use by processing them through using the instrumentalities of reasoning and thinking. You think about what you know. You organize what you know to solve certain problems. You bring pieces of knowledge and information together and organize that knowledge and information in a way to solve a problem. You recall information. You act in terms of what you believe. You use logic, critical analysis, deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning. All of these are means by which we work on knowledge and information and work on our perception of the world as we see it. Analogical thinking, conceptual thinking. We look at events that are going on in the world and we abstract a rule. But every time this happens, that happens. And we can even put it in an equation of some kind. X plus y leads to this, or x squared plus this, which can describe phenomena that occurs in the real world. It means we have abstracted from what we see in the world a rule, you see, and set of rules. We infer from what we see about things we do not see. We look at the implications of things. We use what? Intuition and so forth. All of these are the instrumentalities of consciousness, are the means by which consciousness operates on what it knows, what it remembers, what it perceives, what it even does not know, in order to achieve certain ends at certain points. The instrumentalities of consciousness express what we know and believe and so forth. So our personal skills, our intellectual skills, and academic skills are the means by which we use the knowledge and memory and all the other things we have. Our occupational skills, skills at learning and remembering. The other aspect of consciousness is what we call the directional aspect. It's not enough just to have the skills to process information, you see, and to organize it. You got to organize it for a reason, to achieve a particular point, to satisfy some value, some wish, or some need. You see, I was looking at a discussion here the other evening with a very esteemed public intellectual who apparently had the capacity to reason and think very well. He's been educated in philosophy. and who has apparently a good deal of knowledge. They were supposed to be talking about alternatives to black problems and black leadership. And I didn't see one black problem discussed at all during that little 2 hours. No issue confronting the black community was dealt with at all. Oh, but there was plenty of reasoning. There was plenty of knowledge being displayed there and so forth. But nothing in the sense of applying it to the end of liberating black folk. Applying it to the end of gaining freedom and enhancing the quality of life of black folk. You see, so even though you may have the knowledge and the content, even though you may know black history, even though you may know African history, it's not quite enough yet. Even though you may have the logical skills, it's not quite enough yet. You have to value African people. You have to value African liberation. You have to value African people being empowered and free and self-sufficient and doing for self. That has to be a value, so that when you think and when you process what you know, using logic and abstraction and so forth, it will be processed under the direction of trying to achieve those values, so that you are thinking for a reason, not just to be thinking, not just to be displaying knowledge, but you're engaging in the process of the information to achieve a particular point. So therefore, our desires and our needs and our values and our interests and aspirations and ideals and sense of purpose places a whole direction and purpose on our consciousness, and it organizes our consciousness so that it motivates us to know what instruments we are to use and what knowledge we should use to achieve what end. Okay, hang in with me here. Don't go to sleep on me yet. Because now we get into the point of what we mean when we talk about the falsification of consciousness. Because I want you to see exactly how our consciousness is falsified, in what ways. Now you can see those 3 levels: content, instrumentality, the capacity to process information, to process the content of our minds, and what? Values. You see, when you decide, men, that you're going to get rid of the white man as a power in our lives, and that's a very valuable goal for you. You know, it's a very valuable goal. What you do usually when you say, this is my goal, you start then to run an assessment of your capabilities, don't you? How capable are we of achieving this goal? What kind of knowledge must we have to accomplish this goal? What kind of information must we gather and make a part of our minds and the store of our knowledge in order to accomplish this goal? This is our goal. We want to be free of being ruled by white men. Okay? Now once you kind of get that together, what kind of mental skills must be what? Developed in order for us to use this knowledge and information to accomplish this end. Do we think abstractly enough? Because these people are very abstract thinkers. Do we think analytically enough? Because their hallmark is analytical thinking, isn't it? Do we think conceptually enough? Because we got to do what? We got to outsmart them. We got to outthink them. You see? And when we look at ourselves and say, well, our thinking skills are not what they should be and not up to that task, then we recognize we got to go to thinking school. We got to go where? And learn and develop. See, that's what a value will do for you. It will say, look, if you want to get this, you better sharpen up this skill, you better develop that skill. Do we know how to sit down with other men for 2 or 3 hours or 4 or 5 hours and really think and plan together? Do we know how to stay focused on the subject matter so that we can get something done? Can we subdue our egos and so forth long enough to solve the enterprise? can do it, so we can get where we want to go, then we got to learn it if we don't, you see. And we got to keep that goal upmost in mind so that it can always help us to get back on task. You see? But you see, if you have no goals other than going to work, eating something, and drinking beer, getting sex, then no wonder you can't think. There's no need for thinking and developing thinking skills. If you're addicted to sex and drugs, what do you need to think for? Yeah. If you're satisfied working for a white man on a low-wage job, even a high-wage job, what do you need to think about how to create employment for yourself? How different, I tell people, when we see people go to school, we all go to school with one assumption, that the white man's got jobs out here for us, and all we need to do is qualify for us. But the white man doesn't have the jobs out here for us, and he hardly has the job for himself. How different would our education be if we went to school to learn to create jobs for ourselves? How different would our curriculum be if the purpose for our going to school was not to work for white folk, but to work for ourselves and to create jobs for ourselves and to create wealth for ourselves? How different the content of courses would be that we take and so forth. You say, it's not about lowering standards. It's not about changing standards and the way these people talk about it.
Teach.
You say, it's about building up the appropriate standard. It's not about unequal education. It's about what? Appropriate education. It's about looking at the goals of your nation and looking at the goals of your community and deciding what kind of education you need in order to achieve those goals. But the kind of education we're getting today has the goal of working for white people and forever being the white man's servant and slave in some form or another. And therefore we get a servant's education and a slave's education. And when he has no need for further servants or slaves, he doesn't educate us at all. And that's what's going on at this point. Because now he's hiring across the world. Now he imports the workers that he needs. And consequently, he's disinvesting the education of black people in America. And consequently, if you do not engage in the education of yourself and determine what your education is, if we are not engaging our children to make their own job and to make their own world, we are not going to be around much longer as a people. This is what this is about. So then how does this man falsify the consciousness of our people? Falsify it in three ways, then. You can falsify it by giving people false contents, false history, false knowledge, irrelevant knowledge. You see? Since we say that consciousness contains that, doesn't it? Yes. So even if you can think well, even if you have the capacity for great logical thinking and analytical thinking, if you are using and applying those thinking processes to false information, you're still going to come out to a false end. Okay? And so therefore, one of the first ways our consciousness is falsified is that we fill our minds with irrelevant knowledge or no knowledge at all, or false knowledge, false beliefs, false wishes, all kinds of fantasies. We're going to live together in a raceless world. We're going to live together in a classless world. Negroes sitting around waiting for the classless society to occur. Waiting around when all people are going to live as one. You keep waiting. You won't be here to see it. Oh, we may get a raceless society one day, but you might not be one of the races enjoying it. Yeah. But when you have that kind of fantasy, and that fantasy fills your head, when you think that the thing that's going to solve all the problems is that people love one another, you know, that they respect one another. You get a lot of preaching on Negroes on that behalf. Some of these public intellectuals, we must respect the humanity in each other. What the hell does that mean? How does that feed anybody? How does that employ anybody? You got some Negroes who engage in magical thinking. They think that if they teach their children to love all people, you know, I don't teach my children about color. I teach them to love and respect all people. And not to see color. Well, that's nice. Now that's wonderful. But tell me that this, are the other people teaching their children this? Huh? How is teaching your child this going to protect it against the people who hate you? Do you think by teaching yourself this, by some magic osmosis, other people are going to achieve the same consciousness? You're out of your mind. And yet we get some like people who think that. So they sit around the weakest of people, the most downtrodden of people, teaching their people how to love their enemies. And then wonder why they catch hell at every turn. Yeah, you can do that if you're willing to be dead and let people just run over you to the end. And if someone has convinced you that that's the essence of religious life, fine, it's all right. But I'm telling you, you see, we got a lot of people who are caught up in that thing. So therefore, our masters will put that kind of religion into us, you see, and they will see that as the essence of religion. I've told you many times that the major problem out here, the reason why our children are where they are, is the result of law-abiding, church-going Negroes. Yeah. And it's not the children and the youth who are the greatest criminal threat to the black community. It's law-abiding Negroes. It's Negroes who believe this white propaganda and this falsified religion. Yeah, who can't see color, and therefore they can't see their own colored children. Yeah. Who in their efforts to be sanctimonious and good, create evil. Yeah, because someone told them being good is giving these other people who got more money than they know what to do with their money while they rob their own children. And then they wonder why they fear them as they walk down the street. Who told them love means giving the Koreans all of your money and supporting their children and keeping them out of crime, while your own on the street in need of jobs and in need of being cared for. But someone has convinced you that love means to ignore your own children and love someone else's children better than your own. And you feel holy, you feel good when you do it. Someone has made you feel guilty when you concentrate your attention on your own children. Someone has told you to love everybody. And you're so busy loving everybody, you can't get around to loving yourself. You can't get around to loving your own. How is it there are people filled with self-hatred and have not come to love themselves can appropriately love any other people? And yet we are asking the very people who've been most psychologically abused and destroyed to carry the whole world on their shoulders and to become the universal saviors of mankind. We got some joke out here talking about the universal values of Islam. That save the world. The Arabs don't need you to save them Negroes. The Chinese is not asking for a Negro to come over there and save China. The Frenchman is not asking Negroes to come over there and save them. Why did you get into this business? It's your business to save the world. And that's why you can't do anything for yourself, because you're too busy doing it for everybody else. You're too busy loving everybody. You can't even see the love that your own people need and your own children need. And you can't see that your people need more love than any other people here on earth. Yeah. Let me tell you something. Before you save the universe, before you slave and love all people, love your next door neighbor. Save a black neighborhood. Save black people. And if you can demonstrate that you can save black people, that you can save your next door neighbor, that you can save your family, that you can save your son, then maybe the world will be ready to listen to you and ask for your help. But you got a bunch of Negroes who walk around here and haven't demonstrated their capacity to save anybody. And are talking about universal love, and we're talking about universal values. What the hell does that mean? And they're supposed to be superior to somebody who's committed their lives to African people.
Come on.
Who said, well, I see this people, and I'm a person of finite capacity. I cannot save everybody at once. And therefore, I will save this or try to administer this. But you're supposed to feel guilty because you've decided to save people. The most religious person is the person who gives charity to those who are most in need of it. And when you look at the people who are most in need and the youngsters who are most in need of charity, they're your own children. And therefore, if you're going to be truly religious, you will be most charitable to your own at this point.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. But you see, if you're not capable of discrimination, if you can't see color, you can't see the need. You see? And if someone has convinced you that being religious is being blind, then you can't see the need, and you can't see it's your own children and your own people who need your money most. It's your own children, your own people who need your wealth most. That you will help the world and bring peace into the world. The degree to which you spend your money with these black children and black people, to that degree you will bring peace to America. Yes. You're ready to accept the idea that we are causing and we are disturbing the peace. You're ready to accept the idea that we are the major threat in America. You're ready to accept the idea that black men are irresponsible and black boys are the terror of the world. Then why aren't you ready to accept the idea that they need your help most of all? You see, but you can only discriminate in a backwards way. And because you discriminate backwardly, or because you don't discriminate at all, and someone has told you that means that you're religious and you're sanctimonious, that means you're ignoring people who are in need, and that means you can't discriminate between people who don't need your money and people who do, which means that ultimately you end up enriching the rich and impoverishing the poor, and the poor then, as they react to the impoverishment with crime and other kinds of things, then create and disturb the peace and destroy the peace, and that means that in your goodness, you're actually creating sin.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. But see, that's the way a white man runs it on you. You watch the good Negro. The good Negro is a supporter of everybody else but himself. The good Negro impoverishes his own mind and his own people. The good Negro accepts poverty as being an ongoing characteristic of black people, and wealth being that of other people. Yes, yes. And it's turned around. We have tremendous amounts of wealth, people, in both mind and body and material wealth. You see these white boys running to China over there trying to get that money? Well, China only has about $500 billion to spend. How much money do you think we have to spend? We have $400 billion. Yeah, we got money. We got about as much money as the Mexicans, as much money as the Canadians. That's many nations. That's to spend. If we looked at what we earn, that's only a fraction of what we produce, which means that we as African people are producing trillions of dollars worth of wealth. You see, because an employer only pays you a fraction of what you produce, right? So if we're getting $400 billion through earnings, think how much wealth we must be what we must be producing. And we're not producing it for ourselves. Do you know a nation that has $1 trillion economy would be one of the wealthiest nations in this world? You'd be in the rank of Japan and European nations with that kind of productivity. But we see ourselves as impoverished. And we see our children doing the things they do out there. Why? Because we have misdefined the good. We have let some people put the wrong content in our consciousness and in our mind. We've learned irrelevant knowledge and call it higher education. We've gone to schools and paid $20,000 and $30,000 a year to be made ignorant and stupid and to be called being highly educated. Yes, we think that people who live off of us and suck our bloods are going to give us the kind of knowledge that would allow us to close our veins to them. That's crazy. The other way you falsify consciousness And so you see it here in newer schools, you see it all over. The missing of content. It's not enough just to fill children with knowledge. You got to fill them with knowledge that's relevant. It's got to be appropriate. It's got to be appropriate to solving their problem. And you got to know what your problem is. And you got to know that this educational system here is designed to get black people to solve white folks' problems. Okay? Now, if you're going to get an appropriate education for your children in Newark, you've got to look at your problems. You've got to look at the problem of African people. And if you see the problem of African people as poverty in America, being under the oppression of white people in America, being under the oppression of white people in the world, if you see Africans going hungry above their natural wealth, if you see us, look, that's our problem, that's not the problem of Europeans. An appropriate education then will prepare you to do what? Solve those problems. If you see a problem in the fact that we are not producing enough employment for ourselves, or we are not even producing employment for ourselves, then an appropriate education teaches you what? How to create jobs for self. That's what it's about. You don't give a hoot about what the other people call education. It's pointless. It doesn't matter. Let them get rid of this garbage they're teaching these schools out here. Yes, because what you're learning must have a reason for being learned. And you got to look at that reason first to know if what you're learning is appropriate. And then I don't think it's appropriate that black people learn only to serve white folk and to depend on white folk for their lives and for their protection and security. And yet, that's the essence of the education we're getting out here today. And consequently, we're going to get the kind of knowledge that's going to keep us dependent, that keeps us servants, that keeps us operating on the assumption that we cannot do for self, that keeps us in a position where we just give away and throw away our wealth and impoverish our own children, such that they turn around and kill us in the streets and kill themselves as well. That's how this thing is falsified then. And you see, this is only be done with a small group, which really, you got so many poor people in the world until if they stood up in a rank, they could just run over rich people and take everything they got. Why don't they? Because they fill their minds with ignorance, with false ideologies, with false knowledge, with irrelevant knowledge, such that they're not capable of doing it. And that's the position we are in. The African population is second in size only to China. There's no reason why we should even be talking about small business administration. That's right. We think small. If our businesses were proportionate to our population in the world, we should have some of the biggest businesses in the world. But we are letting our own authors be sold to us by white publishers. Talking about black literature, published by Macmillan and published by, and so forth. And they got these people are representing black people and black aesthetics. How are you going to be in the black aesthetics and black values and speaking real black people and you're enriching white publishers and white folk? Let's be real now. We got that kind of thing. And this is what we got going out here. This kind of game going on. Teaching white children. We got some jokers now who call themselves going to advise black leaders and provide alternatives. Teaching at white universities, and that's their reason that they receive the attention. You know what I call them? Usually just black academic manners. They're breastfeeding white children and the children of the wealthy. They think they can then come down and lecture to black people about how to run their lives. Get the hell out of here. And yeah, we fall for it. We fall for this nonsense. But that's what happens. The other means by which then our consciousness is falsified, as I've indicated, is by impairing our capacities to think. Impairing the means by which we process information. And some of us who mean well often fall for this. We try to tell, and I've told you this before, we try to tell black people with the capacity capacity to think and reason and to analyze and to deduct and to induct and to abstract and to conceptualize. That is as African as anything else we do. It is not a European form of thought. This kind of thinking does not belong to white folk. It is a gift to the African people as well. And I don't care how Afrocentric somebody is. Don't let them come in and tell you that to think analytically, to think abstractly and objectively is European and Eurocentric. It's not the mode of thinking that counts. It's for what you use the thinking that counts. There's no sin in thinking abstractly. There's no sin in thinking conceptually. There's no sin in thinking objectively. The sin is in what you're using this thought to achieve. If you're using it to damage African people, if you're using it to maintain the oppression of African people, then you're misusing it. And if you're not using it such that it maintains the oppression of white people, you're also sinning. I don't care how spiritual you feel. Okay? Because we're about more than spirituality. What is spirituality anyway? You hear people say it, use and throw the term out all the time. We are spiritual people. It's not spirituality. What is that? How are people fed? How are people clothed? Why do we throw away a whole half of our brain? For this reason. There's no necessary contradiction between being a rational and logical thinker and being spiritual. It's not either or. You're not in a situation where, well, if you're spiritual, you can't think. Right. You can't reason. In fact, a truly spiritual person is a clear thinker. A truly spiritual person is an enlightened person. A truly spiritual person is a knowledgeable person. A truly spiritual person knows how to use their thought processes, and they have mastered their thought processes and the other capabilities in their personality and know how to use them appropriately. That is the true test of spirituality, not some blind bumping your head on the floor and praying and kicking over benches. Yeah. We got some people who want to do that. And we've convinced our youngsters that another youngster, a black youngster that wants to learn is acting white. That another black youngster that wants to study is being non-black. That another youngster that wants to read and so forth is somehow effeminate if he's a boy. You got to get rid of that crap. That's made to maintain white men in power. That's nothing to do with being African. Because that kind of thing means a black man is being chumped. And it hurts me so bad when I walk and I ride these subways and all I see is the chumpiness of black boys. Yeah. Who've let these white boys jip their minds. Who are what the white boy needs for them to be, and they call themselves being African or being black and identifying with this nonsense. And yet we have that. And so we see the schools not teaching our children personal skills, the skills of how to get along with each other, not developing the intellectual skills or the academic skills or the occupational skills and learning skills and so forth. If you're going to do a black curriculum, you've got to have thinking skills in the midst of it. You got to, along with the black history and the other stuff. And the other way the consciousness is falsified is by falsifying values. By making us value the wrong things. Yes. Making us desire the wrong things. Seeing our destiny in the wrong sort of way. Seeing it as being one lifelong consumer activity where we are obsessed by nothing but buying and eating and consuming again and again and again. Making us think then our purpose is to be the servants of other people. What then is an African-centered consciousness based on this situation? It's a consciousness that's based on relevant knowledge, knowledge relevant to African interests. It's a consciousness that has in it a knowledge of self as African people, a knowledge of African history and African culture, but also a knowledge of our enemies as well, and a knowledge of what they are about, because we need that knowledge to defend ourselves against them, to deal with them one way or the other. It involves that as well. And African consciousness then has the contents then that are related to the history and experience of African people, an appropriate set of opinions and self-perceptions and so forth that enhance our well-being in the world. And African consciousness is a consciousness that uses its occupational skills to feed African families and to create new jobs and other kinds of opportunities for African people. That develops its academic skills in order to develop the skills of the nation so that it can appropriately adapt to the changing of circumstances. To develop learning skills so that we can quickly learn about the changes in the universe and appropriately adapt to those changes, so that African people can remain free and liberated and self-controlling and self-sustaining. An African-centered consciousness then is a consciousness whose desires are regulated in terms of the interests of African people and the interests of African values, whose desires, when they are fulfilled, enrich other African people, whose values, when they are realized, strengthen other African people and strengthen the African race. They are values whose sense of purpose is the purpose of becoming one with ourselves and identifying with ourselves and loving ourselves as people. When we then get an African consciousness based on an African content with high levels of cognitive and spiritual and other kinds of skills that use this content to advance African interests, with values shaped by African people in the interests of African peoples, needs that when they are fulfilled are needs that strengthen and empower African people, then we would have achieved an African consciousness, an African-centered consciousness. And to the degree that we achieve an African-centered consciousness, and to the degree that consciousness is a power, to that degree we gain power over ourselves. To that degree we gain self-determination and self-control. To the degree that the values we produce and the values we pursue are values produced by ourselves and values that are related to ourselves, values that are not produced by white folk, values and desires not produced by white folk. To that degree then we escape their ability to control us, because they can only control us by controlling the things we value. They can only control us by controlling the things we desire. They can only control us by controlling the things we need. They can only control us by giving us a sense of purpose that's valuable to them. But the day the sense of purpose becomes a sense of purpose we have created out of our own selves, the values are values that come from us, the needs are needs that have been generated by our reality of the people, the desires are the desires that are befitting to us as a people. To that degree, whites lose control and power over us. To that degree, we regain possession of our mind. To that degree, we exorcise the demons that now possess our bodies and minds. And to that degree, we become the equals of any other people in the world. And we can stand shoulder to shoulder and face to face to any other nation of people in the world. We have not been created to be the servants of other people. This definition then will let us know, and we can translate it into concrete things. We can translate it into an educational curriculum. We can begin to look at then what our children must be taught in terms of this type of consciousness. What kind of values must we ultimately create in them, and what kind of skills must we develop in them in terms of where we must go as an African people. And I will bring it to a close here. You must begin to recognize that the position we are in today is not due to, some of the things people talk about. To a great extent, the position that we are in today as African people is the result of powerlessness. If our children are misbehaving and not achieving the kind of education we desire them to achieve, it's because we don't have the power to see that they get it. Isn't that right? That's what it's about. We claim we know what they need. If we claim we know what they need and they're not getting what they need, then we must not have the power to give them what they need. Huh? If we're suffering from hunger and homelessness and all of the other stuff, and we have not changed that, it's because we have not developed what? The power to bring about the change. Because that's what power is about. The ability to bring about change in one's interest. The ability to solve problems. And if you cannot solve problems, that means then power is not being generated sufficient to solve those problems. And therefore, our problem here is a problem of power. And therefore, we must not be ashamed to recognize that we must pursue power as African people. That must be an obvious, conscious pursuit among us. And I know the white folk have made us think the idea of pursuing power is sinful. There's something wrong about it. We think power should only be pursued by white folk. That's white boys' game, right? Just like they've made us think that poverty is a natural condition of black folk.
That's right.
And wealth is a natural condition of white folk. That's a lie of mythology. There's no reason for black people being poor in the world. Being poverty-stricken is not the destiny of African people. We do not have to accept that. Why are we poverty-stricken? Because we've been robbed. We were given and blessed by the Creator with natural wealth, weren't we?
That's right.
That's right. If the intention of the Creator was that African people be poor, why didn't He put the wealth of the world in their lands? Given that wealth and placed in the land, placed under your feet, placed in the soil, and then you dare to think that your destiny is to be poor. You dare to think the condition of starvation is a natural condition of African people. No. No way. If God intended it to be that way, then why wasn't the wealth planted somewhere else and put somewhere else? And that means that if we were blessed with this wealth and we are not using this wealth, that means again we permitted somebody to falsify our minds. Because as I told you before, ultimately the wealth of the people is not in their land. The wealth of the people is ultimately in their head. The wealth is here, not in the land. Not in the land. The Japanese have no wealth in their land. And yet they are a powerful economic nation. Why did I tell you that? You know what? If you got a good mind, you can rob people's land. You can take people's wealth. So that mere having the wealth is not going to do anything for you. You got to have the capacity to what? Defend it. To use it. You see? But if it's given to you and your mind is not appropriately developed and your consciousness is not appropriately developed, other people who may not have anything but a mind, but a consciousness, will enrich themselves off of it. And this is what is happening to black folks. We are not poor because God has not been good to us. God has been abundant to us. We are poor because we've let another people deceive us. We are poor because we've fallen from mythologies. We are poor because we've learned the wrong kind of knowledge. We are poor because we've let our brains be impaired and atrophy in our heads. We are poor because we don't dare to love ourselves. We are poor because we don't dare to pursue power and dare to be independent and self-controlling and self-determined. We are poor because we don't have self-confidence and self-love, not because we don't have wealth. We look at the African nations today. What's the situation there? What's that situation there? We talk about those. It's amazing when you study the starvation in the Sahel Desert, when those people were starving. Do you realize they were shipping out great deals of food at that time? Do you realize that they were shipping food to the world? In fact, their highest levels of shipping beef and other foods were taking place at the very time they were starving? Do you realize that many of these nations where the people are going hungry are actually shipping all kinds of food to the world? Do you think the African people in the Sahel did not know how to prepare for droughts when they've had centuries and centuries of drought occurring again and again, that they had learned over time how to deal with that? Do you think the drought that occurred in the 70s was the first time they had droughts over there?
Talk about this.
When you read that Old Testament and you read about Joseph interpreting the dreams of the king, you recognize that they were dealing with the issue of drought then, didn't you? The king said, I saw 7 fat lambs and 7 slim ones. Whatever, right? He called his wise men in and interpreters in. I said, what does this mean? They couldn't figure it out. No Joseph walked in. Oh, this means you're going to have 7 lean years and 7 what? Fat years. You're going to have a drought that's going to go on for 7 years, and you're going to have 7 years of plenty. And what does that mean then? That you got to what? Store up your food during the 7 years of plenty so that you can survive the 7 years of hunger. And they had more food than they knew what to do with. They even fed other people from their stores. But this is what the Sahelian Africans were doing. Their standard practice was to have granaries where they had 4 years worth of food stored up, so that when those droughts came, they could do what? Feed themselves and take care of themselves, because they'd been through it before. But in came European agribusiness. In came so-called cash crops. In came people with a different concept of property and so forth, and reorganized the agricultural system of that country, such that then while they were shipping out peanuts and shipping out beef and other things, they didn't have room and space to store up to feed themselves. And you find that in nation after nation today. People who by one means or another have had their consciousness twisted in a way that they can't even take care of their very bodily needs as folk. Yes. Why are the African countries poverty-stricken and debt-stricken today? Is it because they don't have the wealth? No, it's because they have the wealth. You rob people who got money. You rob people who have wealth. You can't rob poor people. That's right. Poor people who have nothing, you don't get nothing. You rob people who got something, right? They may be poor as a result of being robbed, but I tell you what, and African people are poor as a result of being robbed, not poor as a result of not having something to begin with. What kind of situation do we have over there then? African monocultures. Selling cocoa beans. You can't even eat the damn thing. But yet that's the only source of your wealth. Yeah, you depend on that. And you plant every possible acre in that, so you know how to have room for a crop for your own family. Or you permit other people to come in and own all the land and all the plantations, and they plant every inch of it so that they can ship the food out, and they won't even allow the native people subsistence farming. So that while they feed overfed people in the West and in Europe, they themselves must go hungry. And they sell then their products in a buyer's market. That is where the buyer determines what they're going to pay for it, not where the seller is going to do it. And so it's the Europeans and Hershey and Nestle and those people who determine what they're going to pay for an African cocoa bean. The African doesn't have any control over that. And they pay less and less every year. They're paying less for them now than they paid 30 years ago. And you're wondering why the African nations are in debt. And these same nations then that lower the price for which they pay for African commodities and maintain these African countries on the basis of 1 or 2 products are the same countries that maintain their prices high and sell to the Africans at high prices and export their high-priced commodities and manufactures to Africa. And so debt is actually what? Created there. I buy too low from you, and I sell what? High to you. That's naturally going to impoverish you. And then we're going to talk about how you're incapable of running your countries. And then we wonder why the countries are broken down. We wonder why they don't have enough money to build their infrastructures and build their schools and build their telephone systems and build their manufacturing plants and build their highways and other kinds of things there. And we want to attribute it to their Africanness and not to the games that white boys play. But let's not get too superior, African Americans. Because we are a third world country too. And the crime in our streets is the result of the same kinds of things that's being played. And creating crime in the streets of Africa, crime in the streets of Jamaica, crime in the streets of Trinidad, crimes in the streets of wherever black people are living nowadays. The same thing is being run everywhere, and it's being run on us. And it's a damn pity and a shame it's being run on us, because we should know a hell of a lot better. We have too much knowledge available to us. We have too many damn libraries open. We have too much information floating around here every day. Newspapers and magazines and books and radios and TVs and everything just pumping out so much information and knowledge you can't take it all in. You have to will yourself to be dumb in America. Yes. Nobody's hiding knowledge from you. You just don't want to go to that library. Just don't want to crack those books. How many kids do I see going to school without even a notebook in their hand? What kind of people are these? And in a sense, we are even more jittered than our African brothers and sisters, because we have it available. It's here for us. We got the computers. We got the knowledge at our fingertips. So it's even more a shame that we are dumb. In other nations that cannot afford the books, cannot afford the schools, and cannot afford the libraries and the computers and so forth, that may be a reason, and often they're much smarter than we are for some reason. What's going on here? We as African Americans are also a monoculture. And what is our sole commodity? Labor. Labor, that's the only thing we sell of any great value in America. Labor. Servants. We came here to be servants, we came here to labor, and we're still laboring. You talking about you escaped from slavery. We're still doing the same thing we did when we first came over here. Laboring for white folk. You think because you're wearing some little sweater, you got some hat turned backwards, all that you represent some advance over what other people used to be. You're crazy. The same position. Exactly the same position. Nothing has changed. You're still a servant of white folks. You're still dependent on white folks. You're still, every nickel you get, you run down there and take it to white folk, because that's your role, is to take money to white folk and make money for white folk.
There you go.
And what's so pitiful, you're willing to kill other black people to do it. You're willing to poison them and destroy families and destroy neighborhoods and terrorize black folk so you can take the money to the white. This is what's about. Now, what does that mean to the African people in America? That means that we are a monoculture, and the only thing we have to sell is labor. And we are now selling our labor in a buyer's market. And the white man is setting the price for which he'll pay for it. And the price is being set what? Lower and lower. Wages are not stagnating. They're actually declining. We can't even get this old joker to raise the minimum wage, which is one of the reasons why all people, almost at all ranks, even college-educated people, salaries are sinking down. Not only the high school, but the ones are sinking down. This is the most backwards, thievish country you'll ever believe. While this topic is getting richer and richer and richer, it won't even vote a $5.25 minimum wage for its workers. And it has convinced a lot of jokers that there's something right about this. So now, what is the African community in then? We're in a situation where even our labor is being cheaply bought, but the people who are selling us the product are still raising the prices.
Yeah.
And therefore we are an indebted nation as a people right here in America. And therefore we don't have any money left to build the schools we need to build for our children, because we are too busy trying to pay for high-priced imports into the black community. We cannot build the kind of homes for them because we have a major national debt as African people. How many of us in here owes so much money to white folk? If you look at yourself as a nation, and I advise you to analyze our problem in terms of a nation, look at your problem in terms of a nation, not in terms of an individual or family, but in terms of a nation, and look at our relationship to other groups as a relationship between nations. The Korean nation, the Chinese nation, the Latin nation, the white nation, you see, and watch how you can begin to see what goes on here. Everything we owe, we pretty much owe to outside nations. Everything we buy from what? Outside nations. And even though we have intrinsic wealth, we cannot enjoy that intrinsic wealth because that wealth is being exported outward to pay our national debt. And therefore we have nothing left to build the kinds of schools we need to build for our children, to build the recreational centers, to redesign our neighborhoods, to support our families, to create jobs for our fathers and our mothers, to create jobs for our youth, because we are giving it all away or pushing it on other people. And now whites need less of our labor and they're paying less for it. So not only are they paying less for it, they are now demanding less of it. And if that trend continues, we'll all be unemployed and poverty-stricken. And when we become unemployed and poverty-stricken, the more we're going to see more criminality, more violence, more family disruption, more problems of social disorganization. And any teaching of so-called family values is not going to change it. Because you see, it's not enough just to teach a value. You've got to reward people for exercising a value. If people are not rewarded for being good, if people are not rewarded for being nice, then they see no reason to continue to be good or to be nice. So it's not enough for you just to teach your children to be good and to be nice and then not change their material circumstances. They're going to reject those values. But some people are telling you all you need to do is teach them to be nice and teach them to be good and yet not change their economic circumstances and yet not control that it's not going to happen. They're going to kill you before they do it. And that is what's going on. What does that mean then? That means we are engaged with the Korean nation, a nation that we, because of our economic ideology that I talked about earlier, because we believe in free and open markets, we just let them walk right in and take every nickel and dime out of the black community. We don't ask them to contribute a damn dime to the churches, not a damn dime to black education, not a nickel or a dime to anything in the community. We just let them come in and take every penny and walk right out. We don't tax them in any sort of way. What kind of nation lets another nation of people enter into its territory and earn wealth and not tax that people in some sort of way and not makes that people employ its people in some sort of way? What kind of people must we be to let someone just walk in and take every nickel and dime out of our pockets?
Sure. That's it.
Yes. And then wonder why our children are the way they are. And then we want to blame them for behaving the way they behave. It's us, the adults, who are creating this kind of world that they live in. Yes. And why are you loving these Koreans? And why are you loving the Dominicans? And why are you loving the Puerto Ricans? Yeah, I'm saying that because we got some people here who talk about people of color. Yeah, they love to use that term, people of color. As if all non-white people have the same goals as they be out there. Another thought coming. There are some people who as black as you are still don't identify with you in any sort of way. They don't identify themselves in terms of ethnicity or in terms of African descent. They identify themselves in terms of a language. That's right, that's right. They don't see any connection to you. you have such lack of self-confidence, you feel so miserable, you want to pull everybody else in for your company. And therefore they just come in and take everything out because they're not white folk. But they're not giving you any more of a job than white folk are giving you. In fact, they're not giving you as many jobs as white folk get. The non-whites rob you even more. Yeah, you don't get anything out of them. Get out of this damn people of color. We are dealing with African people and people of African descent. This is and those who may be of African descent and who choose not to identify themselves as such, we treat them as non-African. So we have these nations. They come into our communities and we let them in. You know, they wouldn't come in if we didn't let them in. They come in and we let them in. Take everything out. And then we cannot go walk into what? Their nation and do that. They're going to block you at the border. If they let you in, you're going to leave something there, baby. There's somebody that's going to come around and extort you. You're going to have to pay some protection money. Yeah, you're going to have to pay something. You're not walking out of there with every nickel they got. They're not going to see their children starve and die in the name of Christian love or some other stupid thing. I'm telling you. They walk 10 miles around you not to spend a nickel with you.
That's right.
They try as hard as they can not to give you one red cent if they can help it. Yeah. And therefore the African people are blocked from the markets of other people. Yes. And then we let them in and block us from our own market as a people. And consequently we are frozen out on both ends of the deal. And we wonder why the community is collapsing. We wonder why we can't take care of our families. We wonder why our men cannot maintain responsibility to their children and to their wives and to their loved ones. It's no mystery. It's no big psychological, complicated issue. It's an issue of economics, an issue of the way we perceive ourselves and the way we relate to the world. And we can change that. But we must achieve an African-centered consciousness. We must achieve an African-centered identity. We must not give a hang whether people love us or not. We're not in the world to be loved by others. That's their problem. It's not ours. And our first effort there is not that of being loved by these other jokers, because they are loving us to death. We have the means to do this. And why are we in a buyer's market for our labor? The same reason why Africans are in a buyer's market for their commodities. Because we have what I call a vertical relationship with Europeans. Our wealth and our material earnings depends upon our relationships to Europeans. And therefore they can manipulate that relationship. But their relationship is not based solely on their wealth, and their power is not based solely on their relationship to African people. There's not a reciprocal relationship here. They do the greatest bulk of their trading with whom? Each other. Each other. They have what I call a lateral trade. They have capacity to trade with each other and to interact with each other in terms of community and trading block. Gives them a weight and leverage against others, you see. This is what it's about. But the African nations are not really trading with each other to any great extent at this point. We as African people in America are not trading with each other at any point to any significant extent. If we were a major portion of the creation of our own wealth, we could then begin to demand the kind of prices we need in terms of trading with other people. But if we are not trading and enriching ourselves through cross-trade, through internal trade, through having control of our internal markets, then we are at the mercy of whatever other people choose to pay for our goods and our services. If we do not control something of value, then we cannot punish or reward other people. Because you can only have power when you have something other people want and something other people need, and you can control it and give or withdraw it based on your own needs and so forth. But if you control no wealth, if you control nothing of value, if you own nothing of value, you make your market valuable by not making it openly accessible to everybody. So to enter it, they have to pay a price. And to get out of it, they have to leave something, you see. And so no nation stands up and just let its borders remain open to be taken by every other nation. And ultimately, one nation or the other tries to capture some vital resources, some vital human resource, a mineral resource, or some other kind of resource that it can use as leverage against other people. But if you don't own some vital human capital, some vital material capital, if you're not even controlled of access to your own market, you have nothing with which to balance the power of other people. And they therefore will use you up and eat you up and eat you alive. When you study then the success and the achievement of other ethnic groups in this country, you will see that they achieved it not by loving anybody, not even by pursuing integration as their ultimate goal, but by identifying with it themselves. I'm going to advise you to read Thomas Sowell's Ethnic America. I don't recommend hardly anything else he writes. It was amazing he wrote such a book and came out the way he did. But particularly read the story of the Irish. Read that. Read this situation. It's of such, I think it's so valuable, because sometimes you see we are so close to our own problems as black people. It's difficult for us to separate our emotions from, objectivity and objective knowledge. And sometimes if you want to come to understand why there's such criminality and violence and why there's such social disorganization and so forth in the black community, it pays you not to study black people first. Because see, black people are not the only people who are violent. Black people are not the only people who were the majority in prison. Black people were not the only people who came from a peasant background and were taken into the urban centers of the world. Not by a long shot. Okay? Prisons were invented before we were even out of slavery. Yeah. The first prisons in the world in America were built right here before 45, 50 years before black people were even out of slavery. They were building prisons. And then it's interesting that when the whites were building prisons for themselves, they saw prisons as reformatories. And they carefully designed the prisons. You should get into the old prison literature and see how they tried to design the walls, the architecture, and everything was perfectly designed to try to rehabilitate these people and bring about their rehabilitation. You should go back and look at all of these parks. You look at Central Park. If you read the history of Central Park, Central Park was a social rehabilitation project. They determined what trees they would plant in terms of what effect they would have on people's minds. How they would plant them and how they would place them. And I'm talking about white folk, because white folk were today yet. You can't imagine the kind of planting. They tried to plan the cities and lay out the streets and build the whole thing in a way to shape the consciousness of people, you see. Because America was being inundated by immigrants and foreigners around the 1830s. And at this point, the urban areas were growing at an extremely rapid pace. Prior to that time, America was a rural nation. And at this point then, America began to become an urban nation. And the very urbanization began to threaten the integrity of the country. America did not know how to deal with these urban masses. And these were white masses. This isn't the first time the cities have been seen as an endangerment to the life of the nation. The first time they were seen as an endangerment to the nation were when the Irish and the Italians and the other ones were inhabiting these cities. And do you know how social work came into being? It came into being to deal with the orphans of white folk and the broken families, white folk. Do you know how the YMCA came into business? The YMCA came in to try to protect these country white boys when they came into the city, to try to maintain their values in the face of the city. Do you know how the Sunday schools came into being? You think they just came into being as a result of the church? There was a whole Sunday school movement in America as a way of trying to rehabilitate the wayward white youth in the cities of America. Do you know how juvenile courts came into being? They came into being to teach the Jewish delinquents and the Irish delinquents. That's how they came into being. Do you know that adolescence as a concept is an invented concept that was created to deal with the wayward youth of white America in the 1800s down to the turn of the century, right into the 1920s? Because these gangs, these white gangs, had control of Newark, New Jersey. These white gangs had control of Philadelphia. These white youth gangs had control of New Orleans. These white gangs was roaming across New York City in the thousands and tens of thousands. White girls were on the streets of New York City at 9 years old. Half of the Irish families were without fathers. Half of the children were just pushed out in the streets by their families, and their fathers abandoned the families. Since when did you identify these things with being black? Because you have not read American history, and you have not read the history at all. You're too willing to believe the worst about yourself. And you'll let other people tell you any damn thing because you won't go and learn. And I'll tell you now, it's not enough just to read black history. You've got to read the history of this nation. Okay? And how do our sportsmen and spokesmen sit in front of a white interviewer on TV and is pushed to explain the behavior of black folks? Explain your behavior. Why do you kill? Why do you murder? Why do you enslave? What am I here on the carpet for? Explain to me why there's so many fatherless children. Well, tell me, why were there so many fatherless children in New York City that were of the Irish extraction? Why were these girls at 9 years old loaded down with syphilis?
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, talk about it. Let's deal with it. Why were these people out here with their outdoor toilets in the backyards, with the sewage flowing over, racked with disease, such that when they would move in the neighborhood, the whole neighborhood would move out. Even black folk would leave out the neighborhood. Why were these people overrun as they were brought into this country with disease, with tuberculosis, cholera, and all other kind of diseases that had disappeared from America? And therefore people knew that when they would come into the neighborhood, you had to get out, or else the whole neighborhood would be plagued. Why were these people living in apartments that were built for one family, and they cut the apartments up into smaller size and put several families in it? Why were mothers and fathers, I'm talking about white folk here,
There you go.
why were mothers and fathers and children all laying up in one bed, in one room? Why did they have little boys' hotels where they fed them pork and beans and let them sleep standing up in a halter for 12 cents a night? Huh? Why were there thousands and 10,000s of white women on the streets of New York prostituting and begging? Why were these girls out there attacking and stealing and doing and cursing and doing all the other things that they were doing? You hadn't heard about that? Why do you see these old buildings with iron bars over the windows and so forth? Who were they protecting their contents from when black people weren't even in the city, huh? Look and come alive and see what was going on, ladies and gentlemen. This was what was going on in America. Why is it now today then, in an effort to save their youth, the whites then defined adolescence as a separate category from adulthood and gave it special characteristics and created a special court for these children? And nowadays, now that the black children are the ones that are the center and focus of criminality, they are redefining adolescence out of existence and saying now that they're going to treat 12 and 13-year-olds as adults. You must understand the politics of crime and understand the game that is being played here. You have to see that. How do you explain the fact that the word Irish and criminal was meant the same thing. Yeah, like today, black and criminal mean the same thing. You think this is new to you? Why then were the Irish overrepresented in the prison population of America, where the vast majority of prisoners were Irish in America? Huh? You didn't hear about that? Why did people get elected to political office running against the criminality of Irish people and running against the criminality of foreigners and strangers? So that you had the American Party, these so-called know-nothings, who elected several governors, who elected many congressmen, who took control of state legislatures running against the criminality of these folk. These Irish people weren't even seen as white people by other people. Why then did you have the shanty Irish and the lace curtain Irish? Why then did we talk about bourgeois blacks and the underclass blacks? Huh? In other words, you see, if you study that history stuff, you'll begin to see some principles operating here that have little or nothing to do with race, that are not intrinsically related to our Africanness or our blackness, but it's related to the political design of a system, related to the very criminal nature of a society that is designed to rob poor people of their dignity and to rob poor people of their wealth and to destroy poor people, such that it locks poor people up regardless of race, so that it locks outsiders up regardless of race, so that it locks people up who are seen as strange and foreign regardless of race, so that it attacks them as criminals and locks them up so that it can convince itself and those people that they are the greatest threat to the society and not the people who are locking them up.
Yes.
So that the focus can be on those who are being locked up and crime can be defined in terms of the pictures you see on the TV show of those who are being locked up and handcuffed, and not the crime of the ruling classes who are impoverishing these people and destroying their very lives. So that we cannot focus on the reconstruction of this society and see our goal is merely the reconstruction of the criminal and the rehabilitation of those families who are supposedly in trouble, and not the rehabilitation of these overfed white people and greedy pigs. So that we can see that the problem is one of increasing police power, of giving the police permission to execute black men on sight, and not to see the fact is that we need to reorient the power relationship between black and white folks in this nation and in this world, and reconstruct who has the power in this society. But as long as you see yourself as criminal, as long as you let the other people convince you that we are criminals, as long as we see the criminal as the poor boy on the street, we don't see the criminal as the ones in the suites. We don't see ourselves then, and we don't see the necessity of changing our economic circumstances and getting in control of our wealth. We don't see the necessity of bringing these white men to heel and changing the power relations and the economic relations in this world. We only want to focus on manhood training and only want to focus on trying to change the values of these kids. Focus on manhood training, but train them to be men enough to deal with white men. Train them to be men enough to change them. This is what we are talking about. I want you to study this Irish because they're very interesting. They were a conquered people in their own land. The British treated them like dogs. They were serfs to the British. The British man could beat them and kick them and dare them not, to hit back. They were not allowed to defend themselves against the British. That's the problem they still have there right today. And you're going to talk, you think because you got out of slavery, the game is up. The Irish, and that game of the Irishmen and the British have been going on since the 1600s. And it's still going on right now. Yes, the British man could send for an Irish man's wife and sleep with her at will. He could send for his daughter and sleep with them at will. When the Irish were starving because of the potato drought, they weren't starving because of the absence of food. The Irish were growing more than potatoes. At the very time they were starving, they were shipping out all kinds of corn and cereal crops. They were shipping out beef and cattle. You hear what I said? Why? Because the British decided that they weren't going to give those cereals to the Irish, and they weren't going to feed them the meat and the milk and the stuff, because as one British lawyer said, we don't want to disturb the operations of the market. And they literally did destroy over 1 million of these people. The Irish population was half what it was in 1914 compared to what it was in the 1830s. They were literally being decimated. And you think you're going to arrive at some peaceful relationship with these dogs. You got another thought coming. But because you don't read history, you can fall into that kind of victimization. And we would just love one another. What are you talking about? We would just respect you. Come on. Read the history of these people and understand who you're dealing with. These people are not open to appeals about love and not seeing color. They are looking at that dollar. And that's the only thing that counts. And if it means that your life has got to be forfeited for them to get it, they're going to do it without thinking twice about it. They shipped these people after they were starving them to death. They wouldn't let them vote. They wouldn't let them be elected. They wouldn't let them practice law. They wouldn't let their children be educated. They couldn't even own property for a good while. They shipped them over here in ships, cargo ships. And they only had a space of 3 feet by 6. Yeah, you think we were the only one packed into these holes? They packed them into these holes and stinking filth. And there was only 3 inches between 3 feet between ships. They couldn't even hardly sit up straight. The women had to go and cross the sea literally sitting up all night and sleeping, sitting up all night, because if they fell asleep in the wrong position, they were had. They had to sit there and fight off the rapists and so forth as they came over. This was what it was about. They had to live in attics. Some attics were not even 3 feet tall. They still had to pay rent for them. Live in depth cellars. Live in alleys and build houses in alleys. The garbage was more than knee high and ankle deep. The sewage was open trenches and flowing into the street. When we got to New York, things were a hell of a lot better than they were for the Irish, I'm telling you. Yeah. And why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this, and again, just because there's some very interesting parallels here. People who've been degraded, who were enslaved and degraded. Okay? And yet we look at where they are today. You see? Yes. And look at the power they exercise today. And the whole bit. It says that because you come in degraded situations and circumstances, the Irish man was a poor, dirty laborer and did all the dirty work of the society. And for a period of time, even the average living quality of life for black people was better than that for Irish people. In fact, the white boys would give the Irish men work to do that they wouldn't even give the black slave, because they had an investment in the slave. Yes. They would have advertisements, Irish need not apply. Oh yes, Irish had the highest rates of insanity, the highest rates of alcoholism. Yes, yes, you heard of the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame? You think that's a play name? They were fighting people, man. They fought each other like cats and dogs. They chopped each other up and knifed each other and shot each other in ways you wouldn't believe that even our black youngsters have got to yet. These people used to have gang warfare that would last for a whole week. 7 and 8 days, I'm telling you. They had a riot that went on for 3 or 4 weeks. When they got to fight, they were firing cannons. I'm telling you. Yes. Why don't we hear this history? Because people want to believe that black folks, are the only people who behave in this way, and this is intrinsically related to blackness. And we got black spokesmen who want to throw this stuff back in these white boys' faces when they start trying to explain this. Why is this going on? And they run the story about 129th Street in Harlem, 3 series about black people as if this is representing some new phenomena in America. And this is representing something. These people, the Fighting Irish, they fought each other. You heard the word Donnybrook? Yeah, that's why. These people, they just get out there and just battle and fight, just knock each other up for no reason whatsoever. They used to wear handkerchiefs of colors in their pocket, black boys. You think you're doing something new? Colors? That's nothing new. They wore colors. They wore their hats backwards and to the side. You think you're just imitators out here. And not good ones at that. Because you know what they used to do? Attack cops on sight.
That's right.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Cops wouldn't go in some of their neighborhood. They would have to go 4 and 5 at a time. Now they would come out alive. Okay? Are you kidding? You haven't seen anything yet. Okay? Yes. Well over half the people arrested and put in jail were Irish. Where did the word paddy wagon come from? Right. Whites, Irish called what? Paddies, and the police wagon was made for all of the men. Paddy wagons. We can go on and on here. But and the orphans, all of these, they were known as thriftless people. People who didn't know how to spend their money. And they were not ashamed to beg. Known for getting on welfare. Yes. 60% of the people in the poorhouse, Irish white folk. As they moved into Boston and other cities, the welfare rolls and the charity rolls more than doubled. Didn't hear of bathtubs. Didn't know what bathtubs were. You know? So what are we saying here then? But they got out of it. And there were other groups who had similar conditions. But I talked about them because they resemble a lot of ours. Yes. How did they get out of it? They got out of it by finding some kind of political, economic niche. By learning to control some lever of power. They took control, political control of the cities. They took political control of the civil service. They didn't come in here, we're going to hire all people fairly. We, you know, and be the height of the Dinkins Fairness Brigade. They came in there knowing who they were going to hire. They were going to hire their own people. And they were going to get their own people in there. And they brought them in there until they got them out of poverty. And they brought them in there until they gained respect. And they gained respectability. And then the white would say, okay, we think you're white enough, now come on in. We'll make you one of us. You see, when these Spanish people get control of these cities, you are not going to be in part of it. You can believe that. I'm going to tell you that. You can talk people of color all you want to. Because these other people understand the name of the game. And that is to get in so they can bring their own in with them. Okay. They want to talk to Negroes and make Negroes saints. And we're supposed to be examples to mankind, the poorest and the weakest and lowest people. Got to be an example to mankind. We're going to hire everybody. In fact, we try to prove how fair we are by hiring the other ones first. You see? Yeah. And one of the things that the Irish were noted for, and one of the other reasons why they were fighting Irish, because they'd attack everybody that wasn't Irish too. That's right. Because they had immense solidarity as a people. Immense identification one with the other. And they had been fighting these British so long. And they had learned how to deal in subversion and so forth until they ultimately used the skills for their subversive activities against the British and the skills that they learned in organizing their resistance to the British. They transported it to political skills that they used here in America to advance their interests, and even represented areas that weren't even Irish. And still had control of the areas. And what's the point here that I'm getting at, ladies and gentlemen? We're even in a better condition than they were as a people. We even now, as black people, have more to work with than they had at that point. Then what is missing? The major thing that's missing then is an African consciousness.
Yes, sir.
Is an African solidarity, is an African identity, and an African-centered purpose, and a commitment to the advancement of African people. The only thing is missing is our failure to see ourselves as a nation, and to organize ourselves as a nation. To become a nation in America, to gain control of our internal markets in America, to gain a good significant amount of ownership of the mainstream economic system. We just don't want to own the moms and pop stores in the black community. We want to own them downtown. We're going to own them in the malls. And not only are we going to own them downtown in the malls, we're going to own good chunks of Xerox. We want to own good chunks of IBM. We want to own good chunks of Con Ed with their cheating self out there, overcharging black churches and everything. They even overcharging the people who pray a lot. And despite all their prayers, Con Ed came right in and hiked their bills right up. And we got more churches than anybody. I guess that's why they charge us more. In the future, what is going on here today is that corporations will literally be sovereign in the world, not governments. The NAFTA agreement, the GATT agreements have transferred the power of governments to international bodies so that these international bodies will be able to overrule the U.S. Congress. They will be able to overrule the U.S. Supreme Court. And if there are trade disputes and other disputes between nations, if United States laws about pollution and so forth are seen as hindrances to trade in the world, these countries can take the United States to an international court and have that court have the United States to abrogate its own environmental laws and other laws in the interest of world trade or penalize the United States. Why then are you electing governments? Why are you electing people to office when the power to determine this nation's laws and determine trade and so forth is put in the hands of international bodies? And who are these international bodies protecting? The trade between corporations. And who owns these corporations? White boys, Chinese boys, French boys, and the other boys in the world. If then the corporations are going to be ruling the world, then we must be major owners in those corporations. We must be in a position to see that if they make moves, we can protect the interests of our people. Once then we get control, and we must get control first of that internal market, because we're going to use that wealth to buy into the larger market, and then we're going to fully engage as a nation into international trade. Because this is what nations do if they just save their people. We're going to create jobs by engaging in international trade across the African diaspora and in the world. We see the diaspora as a punishment. And our diaspora now is our best asset. We now have got to reverse the way we deal with things. We've got to stop looking at ourselves as the victims of propaganda. We've got to look at how can we use propaganda proactively to advance our interests. We've got to stop looking at the diaspora as a sign of our miserableness and look at it now in terms of how can we empower ourselves. You see, in order for the European to build an international economic system, he had to create a deliberate diaspora. You see, when we talk about people being colonized, we get the wrong idea. It wasn't that the Africans were so much colonies of the Europeans. It was actually the Europeans in Africa that were the colonies. You see? Because the Africans were not trading with the Europeans. It was the European colonists trading with the Europeans. You see, so the colonists came into Africa and over the place to extract the wealth there and to claim that wealth and to trade with their counterparts. And therefore, these colonies were deliberately created, and they then were used as means to create a global economic system. Now, when we look at the fact that we are throughout South and Central America in large numbers, you see, and of course in the Caribbean, and of course in Africa and so forth, we must now begin to look at this situation as a basis for the creation of a pan-African economic system that can rival the Asians and the Europeans. And therefore, what we must learn now is about import and export trade and international trade. We must begin to learn about capital markets. We must begin to learn about investment banking. We must begin to learn about syndication of money and how you raise wealth and create wealth so that you can build corporations and so forth. And then it is there, because what I see African people in America becoming, I see the African people in America becoming the central marketing factor in the African community. We are in this nation, and we are one of its largest markets. We want to now make this market available to African manufactured products, because at this point the United States is blocking those products out. And Africa cannot become a manufacturing and industrial nation if no nation will buy its manufacturing. Quick example, Ghana, which sold cocoa beans, decided that the money was in the processing of the cocoa beans. But that's the white man's game, isn't it? Nestle wanted that. Hershey wanted that. They just wanted Ghana to sell the raw beans, you see. And they went out and bought the factories so that they could turn the cocoa beans into cocoa and refine chocolate and sell that, because that's where the money end of the deal was. The United States and these other Europeans would not let those products cross their borders. At this point now, as African Americans, we must empower ourselves in such a way that we are going to get this government, the same way we rallied for South Africa, the same way we rallied for Haiti, the same way we rallied for Namibia, the same way we rallied for any African nation that has problems. And we go to the Washington government and get them to change their policy in the interest of the liberation of African people of the world. And we're not through now. The next game is to do this, to knock down those tariffs that they have against African nations, to get this nation to relieve the Africans of that debt that they have laid upon them and make their lives impossible. This is the political goal of the African community, and to control and hold our money and squeeze their economic balls until we get what we want from them and change the nature of this people. And if Hershey is going to block the buying of African refined cocoa, we'll drink another hot chocolate in our lives, because we're not going to let it happen. You understand what's got to go on here? You dig it? This is the kind of game, because the other deal is you want them to develop their capacity to manufacture. You're going to stop going down to this gap and buying that garbage down there until you recognize if it's going to be sold and you're going to buy it, you're going to see that those clothes are sewn in Africa and sewn in the Caribbean and sewn in Central and South America. You're not going to put $1 into it. See? You understand? So as you bring them into being, sewing and creating, manufacturing and so forth, they will grow technologically and they will advance industrially and create jobs for their people, because their African American brothers and sisters are making their dollars available to their product, and they are opening the borders of America to their products. And this is how you advance. That's why the African American, the Africans in America are the key. We are the key group to the advancement of Africans all over the world.
Yes, sir.
And you have to understand the role that we must play. But we're not going to let this Nigerian oil move from white-owned hands in Nigeria to white-owned hands in America. We got to learn about the capital markets in Africa. And we got to see investment in Africa as a natural place for us, as investment in America was a natural place for the investment of the English, and a natural place for the investment of the Frenchmen, and a natural place for the investments of Europeans, all kinds. Do you know that the American nation was a debtor nation until 1915? Yeah, we think this is the first time America was a debtor nation. No, it's not. Because of why was it a debtor nation? Because the wealth of Europe was being exported to America to build up its infrastructure and to develop its industrial base. And America's market was protected from competition until its industries got strong enough to compete in the world. And that's what you got to do to your internal markets. You got to sharpen your stores and protect your stores against the competition of other people. You got to sharpen with your corporation and protect your corporations until they grow strong enough to compete on their own against other people and other races and other groups. You got to see that Africa is a natural place for us to invest in. And we've got to become the financiers of African development the world over. And we've got to become the marketers of African products in America and in the world. We've got to become the designers of product. We then will play a role in the totality of the African political and economic system. And every African product, manufactured and otherwise, should move through the hands of African people in America. And we should be marketing them to the Woolworth and to the Walmarts and to all the rest of these gangsters. If they can sell irons made in China, and there are 10 times as many black people in this country as there are Chinese, then they can sell irons made in Nigeria. If we can buy Chinese-made irons in Woolworths and in these other places, we can buy irons made in the Caribbean, irons made in South America, irons made in Africa, etc. And we can see stamped on the made in Nigeria, made in Ghana, made in here, made in there. And those irons and those products and those cheap fans and all that other stuff can be wholesaled by African Americans and sold and marketed by African Americans, both through African American retail and European retail situations. And therefore we create jobs for African Americans here in America, and we create jobs for Africans the world over. We got it. All we got to do is take it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, my brother. Sister Francis, you kind of come to the front. Sisters and brothers, we have some important announcements to make. Let's thank the brother. We hope to see everybody back here next week.
Where was there? Okay, thank you.
His son is Jonathan.
Okay.
He died before he finished.
Okay. Okay, we're done. We talk to you here.
My name is Eddie.
Head of the Secretary of Commerce, and black people ain't even in business. He's taking white folks up in China, making deals for them. Okay? You got another part that heads the Department of Agriculture, black people ain't on the farm. What are we talking about here? So the idea of electing people to office and getting appointed to office without being connected to power is appointed. That's what I'm saying.
Understood.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.
Sisters and brothers, I'm going to ask you to ease the brother. Besides being tired, he has to go back to the Bronx.
Put your name in.
That is my name.
Okay.
I'm first. You have one taking the plan. Chance to win. I read that.
That's an excellent organization plan.
It's an excellent organization plan. It says you can take 4 or 5 people, and that's where the seed starts.
Right.
Okay.
Because the
That's where we start. See, I'm having problems trying to get them 4 or 5 people who think like-minded. Do something. Sit down.
Well, maybe you're starting with wrong people. Maybe you have to start working with an earlier generation on some other level.
Okay. But is that how you start? What would you suggest?
Because the masses don't make revolutions.
No.
It's small groups of people.
Small groups.
And motivate and mobilize masses.
So I
and
just
make
put that on a national chartering, like on a Marcus Garvey thing?
Yes. A perfect example. And see this book on philosophy.
Opinions of Marcus.
Not that one. That's another one that he has.
I know what you're talking about, the leadership thing.
Yeah, and he talks about
the one that the Nation of Islam used.
the whole curriculum that he had laid out in that use of propaganda.
Oh man.
And where he had, now the other deal is
I got it out.
what I call geometrical growth.
Case.
And what does it mean? You don't worry about getting 10 people.
They'll come in.
Look, if you get 10 people, that's fine. Thoroughly trained. Don't
Excuse me, bro.
What you want to do is what we call train trainers. Okay? If you can train 10 people, and they can train 10, you got to have
Chance says 6 to bring in 3 more.
So don't try to get big crowds. Even if you can do 4 or 5, and they can do 4 or 5, you quickly multiply it to 25. Within a year or 2, 2,000 people right across the country.
That's where I'm at. I'm tired of talking this time over.
Well, you see, the other thing, it's not that we're talking.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the things we need to be talking about. We need to talk about this. Now, what you're talking about now is organizational principles. And what we need to study there is to study organization and to answer the kind of question that you're talking about. Okay. See, it's difficult to lecture that kind of thing.
Would you be willing to sit down with some people, you know, think like that, and want to work and grow or something like that?
I'm always open to that kind of thing.
Brothers, let me continue. Brother has to go to the Bronx.
Which book do you have? Books you have? What book you have on that?
Which, when I tell my thing?
Yeah,
that's really coming out of the next one.
oh, okay.
Yeah. To a degree, though, you get a beginning of it in Falsification of National Consciousness.
All right.
That'll start. Yes, it is. That's the one.
Going out of the city,
Almost the same. Give me a special call. Now, this is my own stuff.
Okay.
Now, you come in and I ain't getting my class.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to here first.
Okay, take it.
All right. Hey, now, here you go. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, okay. Who? How you spell?
I just
Capital letter? 8? O-N? Oh yeah, I have. Definitely. Oh yeah.
just throw the tape on her. You should have been here.
That tape that boy from the
Oh, now let's
He got you good. He got me. Why you laughing, man?
okay now. All right.
That's about to laugh.
Yeah.
Hey, Paul Gibson. Captain got some tapes from your man from Philadelphia. He was up.
Oh,
He was up at the Dempsey Center.
Oh, no.
And
He's doing some
Captain
great
decided
work
to
now.
donate some money.
All right. That's good. It's on to you. I know you're not going to support me. Thanks for coming.
Where you going?
Yeah.
I'm 21st and 7th from the home state building. Yeah. You gotta give me a card. You gotta let me know definitely.
The plan that Bookman has.
Tell you what I do.
Chancellor, definitely, especially the book
Yes.
about the economics and all of that.
Yeah.
Start that. Philosophy and opinions, race matters. You have to take the concept of a little bit of even beyond. I see it. But you have to hear. That's where I'm trying to correlate everything together.
Chancellor's
It's the
plan
best. It's the best.
is most complete and very well thought out.
Okay, well, how would you come up with a charter for other people to live under certain principles, like you said, values? Because that would have to be, any organization would have to have a value system and have a charter and laws and bylaws for people to live by.
Well, then you'd have to do that for your own original group.